greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember.
They were once inseparable, standing side by side through decades of whispers, headlines, and history. Charles and Camilla, the couple that defied convention, seemed untouchable in their final ascent to the throne. Their love had weathered scandal, exile from public favor, and the towering shadow of a princess the world never forgot. But now, the silence is louder than any royal proclamation. In recent days, something has shifted behind the gates of Buckingham Palace. There's no official statement, no televised address, just absence. Camilla, Queen Consort, the woman who once walked proudly beside the king, has disappeared from the public eye. No royal engagements, no press photos, not even a whispered mention from the palace press office. The public, caught off guard, is left asking a single question: what happened? No one can pinpoint when the fracture began. There was no grand fallout, no explosive tabloid moment, just a slow, almost imperceptible unraveling. A pause between appearances, a quietness between once familiar glances. And then, nothing. Camilla didn't leave like a woman defeated. She didn't cling, argue, or plead. She simply stepped away. No pageantry, no parting wave, only the hush of a chapter closing without explanation. Now, Charles stands alone at the summit of power, his posture still regal, but his eyes tired, haunted by a loss that duty can't resolve. In his silence, there is no drama, no theatrics, just a man grappling with the one truth royalty never prepares you for: how to let go. Social media ignites. News anchors speculate. Historians dig through timelines for signs they missed. Was it ambition? Was it the weight of old ghosts? Or was it something far more devastating? The quiet realization that even the strongest love can fracture under pressure, no crown can protect you from. In the absence of answers, one thing is clear. This isn't just about a royal marriage, it's about a turning point. And the storm it may unleash has only just begun. Their story didn't begin in a palace. It began quietly, in the early 1970s, at a polo match where a young Prince Charles met Camilla Shand. She wasn't a princess or a media darling. She was sharp, grounded, and full of the kind of humor that cut through royal stiffness. To Charles, she was effortless in a world that demanded everything be carefully constructed. And in that, she became unforgettable. But their love came at the wrong time. Charles, still heir to the throne, was expected to marry someone younger, untouched by prior relationships, someone who fit the image of a future queen consort. Camilla, independent and already romantically tied to another, didn't fit that mold. And so, the royal machine turned its wheels and Charles moved on, not by choice, but by command. Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles. Charles married Diana Spencer. And yet, the story didn't end. For decades, they remained connected, not always physically, but emotionally. Camilla was never far from Charles's thoughts. Even as his marriage to Diana unraveled under the pressure of global attention and personal distance, Camilla remained a quiet presence in the background, a figure of loyalty, understanding, and emotional refuge. It was a love that refused to be erased, no matter how much scandal followed. The public backlash was brutal. When news of Charles and Camilla's continued relationship broke in the 1990s, it wasn't just scandalous, it was volcanic. Camilla was cast as the villain, the other woman, the destroyer of a fairy tale. And for years, she stayed in the shadows, letting the storm pass overhead without offering defense. But storms don't last forever. After Diana's tragic death in 1997, Charles began the slow, deliberate work of reshaping the narrative. He didn't rush. He didn't demand. He simply waited and gradually reintroduced Camilla to the public. A private appearance here, a photo there. Time, patience, and quiet dignity became their strategy. In 2005, more than 30 years after they first met, Charles and Camilla were finally married. It wasn't a grand affair, it wasn't meant to be. It was a quiet civil ceremony, followed by a blessing at St. George's Chapel. The Queen herself, once hesitant, offered her support, and in 2022, the once scorned other woman became Queen Consort. It was a story of extraordinary endurance, of love tested by time, torn by public opinion, and forged in the fires of royal expectation. But now, just a few years later, that victory seems to be unraveling. Not with scandal, not with betrayal, but with silence. At first it was hard to notice. Camilla, ever poised, stood beside King Charles with the same graceful restraint that had carried her through decades of public scrutiny. Together they waved to crowds, posed at state dinners, and maintained the image they had fought so hard to legitimize. But beneath the royal routine, something had begun to change. Those closest to the palace started noticing the subtleties, the shifting dynamics behind the scenes, fewer public appearances together. Conversations that once flowed, now punctuated with long silences. Shared glances turned cool. In photos, Camilla's once easy smile began to look more like a performance. Charles's posture stiffened, not with authority, but with tension. Some chalked it up to stress. After all, Charles had only recently taken the throne after the longest wait in royal history. The pressures were immense. Constitutional responsibilities, public opinion, family reconciliation, and the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II casting a long shadow. But those close to the inner circle whispered that this wasn't about work. It was about them. Sources spoke of private disagreements that began to seep into professional matters, scheduling conflicts, clashing priorities, and sharp words behind palace doors. One particularly tense moment reportedly came after a charity gala, when Camilla questioned Charles's lack of public support for her growing initiatives. "You wanted me beside you," she said quietly, "but you won't stand beside me." Charles, weary and preoccupied, reportedly replied, "I need peace, Camilla, not more noise." That night, they returned to Clarence House in separate cars. From there, the distance widened. Camilla, long used to being sidelined by protocol, had begun asserting herself more confidently, perhaps too confidently for some palace insiders. She wanted a voice in the public narrative, input on appearances, speeches, and even staffing. But the monarchy is slow to adapt, and those shifts, however subtle, began to cause ripples, especially with Charles, who was struggling to balance tradition with transformation. Still, there was no explosive argument, no clear fracture, just a gradual, painful drift. Royal observers began to note Camilla's decreasing presence. A postponed engagement, a cancelled appearance. At first, it was dismissed as rest or illness, but the absences multiplied. When she skipped a major diplomatic banquet without explanation, the questions started. And yet, no answers came. The palace remained tight-lipped, but silence, especially in royal circles, is rarely empty. It often signals more than words ever could. The couple who had once stood united against the world now appeared to be retreating into separate corners of the same castle. And those watching closely knew something was breaking. As Camilla settled into the role of Queen Consort, it became clear she wasn't content to remain a ceremonial figurehead. After years of being cast in the shadows, she wanted to shape her legacy, not as a passive partner, but as a public force. At first, Charles welcomed her ambition. He admired her strength, her ability to endure decades of ridicule, and her renewed commitment to the crown. But what began as shared purpose soon transformed into something more combative. Quiet collaboration gave way to territorial tension. Camilla wanted more influence. She had endured the pain, the press, and the public opinion polls for years. Now, with the crown resting on her husband's head, she believed she had earned a voice, not just in family matters, but in the very direction of the monarchy. Insiders recall a private dinner at Windsor Castle where Camilla challenged Charles over the palace's media strategy. "The public needs a queen who stands with the world, not behind it," she said firmly. pressing for a more active role in addressing modern issues. Charles, taken aback, responded with diplomatic restraint. The monarchy evolves slowly for a reason. That conversation set the tone for what would become an escalating power struggle. Camilla began making decisions without consulting Charles or his senior aides. She reportedly altered public appearances, canceled long-planned events, and redirected attention to causes of her choosing. Most controversially, she intervened in a speech planned by the Princess of Wales, Kate, claiming it lacked the formalities suited to a senior royal and was too socially progressive. The move sparked quiet outrage inside the palace. Kate, known for her careful balance of tradition and modernity, had spent weeks preparing the speech. It was meant to highlight mental health initiatives among children, an issue close to her heart and central to her royal role. Charles, upon learning of Camilla's interference, was furious. He summoned her to his private study, where the confrontation played out away from staff, but not beyond hearing. "You had no right," Charles reportedly said, voice strained. "Kate represents the future. Undermining her undermines us all." Camilla stood her ground. "I've spent years being quiet while everyone else was protected. I've earned my place. I will not be invisible again." The argument didn't end with shouting. It ended with silence, the kind that sinks deep and doesn't lift for days. From that moment, their partnership, once built on survival against external criticism, turned inward. They weren't fighting the world anymore. They were fighting each other. Royal staff began to feel the strain. Some were asked to choose sides. Aides were shuffled. Briefings became inconsistent. Appearances grew more strained. And at the center of it all stood a king, torn between tradition and the one person who had stood by him for decades, now becoming his greatest challenge. The crown was never light, but now it was cracking under the weight of a war not with enemies, but with the very woman who had once been his strongest ally. In public, they still stood side by side, poised, polished, practiced, but behind palace doors, something had shifted between King Charles and Camilla. Not just tension, not just disagreements, something quieter and far more painful. Resentment. The cracks in their working relationship were now seeping into the spaces that had once been sacred. Shared dinners turned into silent meals. Joint meetings ended in curt nods. The comfort they had always found in each other was being replaced by something neither of them fully understood: disappointment that bordered on betrayal. Camilla, once a symbol of stoic loyalty, began to question everything she had given up. Her marriage to Charles had not been simple. It had been forged in fire. Scandal, loss, grief, public hatred. She had endured the world's judgment to stand beside him. And now, as queen, she expected not just a title, but true partnership, a voice, a place at the table she had waited decades to join. But Charles, exhausted by the pressures of the crown, haunted by the past, and increasingly torn between loyalty and legacy, was pulling away. He had become reflective, distant. Old photos of Diana remained in his study. Letters from Harry sat unread on his desk. He spent long hours alone, his thoughts drifting to memories not shared with Camilla. And she noticed. One evening, after a strained engagement at Balmoral, Camilla broke the silence. "You speak more of Diana now than you ever did when she was alive," she said, her voice level, but laced with pain. Charles looked at her, eyes tired. "Because I've lost too much," he replied, "and I'm afraid I'm about to lose more." For a moment, the weight of everything between them filled the room. The years of sacrifice, the choices they made, the love that had once defied the world now sounded like a whispered memory. But Camilla couldn't hold it in anymore. "I gave up my name, my peace, my life," she said, tears finally welling in her eyes. "And even now, I'm still in her shadow." Charles said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because, deep down, he knew she was right. They had built their relationship on survival, on defiance. But now, with no enemies to fight, their foundation was cracking under the weight of unspoken expectations. Camilla began spending nights alone in her private quarters. Staff noticed her withdrawing. She canceled appearances, ignored press inquiries, spoke only when necessary. And Charles, for all his royal stature, was powerless to stop it. He once told a friend, "I always thought love would be enough. But sometimes love isn't loud. It doesn't fight to be heard. Sometimes it fades, quietly, leaving behind only the echo of what once was. And in that echo, two people once united against the world now stood as strangers, not defeated, just deeply lost. It didn't come with an announcement, no press release, no farewell statement stamped with the royal seal. Camilla simply vanished. The evening was ordinary by palace standards. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Clarence's house. The usual hush of protocol hung in the corridors like fog. But beneath the stillness, something final had begun to unfold. Just after dusk, a sleek black car rolled through the gates, its headlights low, its windows darkened. Few noticed, fewer understood. Inside, Camilla sat alone. No staff, no fanfare, just a leather-bound handbag on her lap, and silence. A guard stationed near the side entrance later recalled seeing her leave. She nodded once, no words, but her eyes were glass. He paused before adding, she looked like someone saying goodbye to a life. By morning, her name had been quietly removed from 2 scheduled appearances. A royal aide offered a vague explanation. The Queen Consort is taking time away from public duties. No timeline, no elaboration. But the media sensed a rupture. Within hours, news sites lit up with speculation. Where is Camilla? Palace in turmoil, royal rift rumors. Swirl. Tabloids recycled photos of her at past events, her hand resting gently on Charles's arm at his coronation, her green silk gown shimmering under the lights of a charity gala. Headlines dissected every detail of her final appearances, hoping to uncover a clue in the curve of her smile or the set of her shoulders. But Camilla offered no clues. She was gone. In her absence, Buckingham Palace stood still. No official explanation came. No one filled the silence. Not Charles, not aides, not even the ever-curious press officers. Inside, the king's world dimmed. Charles remained at Clarence's house, surrounded by portraits and protocol, but now startlingly alone. Those close to him said he barely spoke that day. He sat in his study, a single lamp on, his gaze fixed not on paperwork, but on the rain falling outside. He held something small in his hand, an envelope with Camilla's handwriting on the front. It wasn't long, just one line. I loved you more than the crown ever could. No accusations, no demands, just a final truth. And in that single sentence, decades of struggle, sacrifice, and silent heartbreak crystallized. Camilla had not stormed out. She hadn't rebelled. She had simply reached her limit. And in doing so, she left behind a throne she had never truly belonged to, and a man still unsure how to be king without her. The monarchy is built on routine, processions, protocols, perfect symmetry. But after Camilla's quiet exit, nothing felt orderly anymore. Within Buckingham Palace, a strange stillness settled over the halls. Staff, trained to say little and hear everything, moved more cautiously. Doors that once stayed open between Charles and Camilla's quarters were now firmly closed. And in the press room, briefings were shorter, vaguer. Each sentence weighed like a secret. Behind the scenes, chaos simmered. Senior advisors held emergency meetings in soundproof rooms, huddled around long tables beneath centuries-old portraits. Their questions were simple, but terrifying. Would Camilla return? Should they tell the public more? How could they manage a royal absence with no plan? One aide summed up the mood bluntly. This isn't just a personal crisis, it's an institutional one. Public confidence in the monarchy, already bruised from years of scandal, generational tension, and Harry's exile, now teetered again. The image of Charles as a steady ruler, reinforced so carefully after the Queen's death, was being quietly unraveled by uncertainty. Without Camilla, the king looked vulnerable, and the public saw it. In the days following her disappearance, newspapers wrestled with tone. The Times ran a cautious headline, "Queen Consort steps away from public life." But the tabloids didn't hold back. Camilla walks out, the king alone again. Another royal breakup? Social media became a storm of its own. Some defended Camilla, calling her brave for leaving what one user described as a machine that eats its own. Others speculated wildly. Health issues, secret exile, a power play gone wrong. Hashtags like "Why's Where is Camilla" and "Why Queen No More" trended for days, but no answer came. Charles remained silent, but insiders described a man in mourning, not for a death, but for a disappearance. He stopped attending scheduled meetings. He withdrew from press appearances. Even his staff, seasoned in managing monarchs, said they had never seen him this way. One particularly loyal aide recounted finding Charles late at night in the royal library, sitting in darkness with only the fire burning. "I lost the one person who knew me beyond the crown," Charles said quietly, "and I let it happen." That single sentence spread through the palace like fog, thick, inescapable, and heavy with regret. Meanwhile, Camilla's whereabouts remained confirmed only by rumor. Some claimed she was at Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, her private estate. Others whispered of a retreat in Scotland, but she stayed silent. No statement, no sighting, no return. Her absence, paradoxically, had become her loudest act. And as the monarchy struggled to find footing without her, it became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a marriage under strain. It was a kingdom facing a reckoning. As King Charles receded into silence and Camilla disappeared from the frame, all eyes turned to the only remaining constant, William and Kate. For years, they had been groomed not just as heirs to the throne, but as the bridge between the monarchy and a rapidly evolving public. Now, with the royal family fractured again, their roles intensified. What was once gradual preparation became urgent responsibility. Within Kensington Palace, the tone shifted. Meetings that had once centered on long-term legacy suddenly focused on short-term stability. Media strategists huddled with aides. Speechwriters drafted carefully worded messages. Every step William and Kate took in public was now measured, not just as goodwill, but as damage control. "They're not just filling the gap," one royal advisor noted. "They are the monarchy's lifeline right now." Kate leaned into the moment with quiet strength. She ramped up her public engagements, hospital visits, school initiatives, mental health roundtables. In every room, she smiled gently, listened deeply, and offered stability. The press praised her for embodying grace under fire. William, though visibly tense, remained composed. He took on more ceremonial duties, standing in for his father at state meetings, delivering speeches once reserved for the king. But behind closed doors, his calm was a veneer. One evening after a charity dinner, he confided in Kate over tea. "We're standing on fractured ground," he said, "and I don't know how long it will hold." Kate's reply was simple but firm. "Then we stand anyway. Until it's solid again." For William, the situation was doubly painful. He wasn't just the heir stepping up. He was also the son watching his father crumble under the weight of love, loss, and legacy. And he was determined not to let the crown fall, no matter what. Amid all the speculation surrounding Camilla's departure, one name began to rise again, and not by coincidence: Diana. Her presence, though long gone in life, remained deeply woven into the royal narrative. Every time the public saw Charles alone, every time Camilla was discussed, Diana returned, not in person, but in memory. Her 1995 BBC interview resurfaced once more. The quote echoed across headlines, social media, and dinner tables. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Nearly 3 decades later, those words still held power, still pierced. For many, Diana was never just a princess. She was the heartbeat of a broken fairy tale, a woman who wore pain with elegance and turned suffering into strength. Her story had become immortal, a story of love betrayed, a crown that couldn't protect, and a legacy that outshone even royalty. Camilla had always lived in the shadow of that legacy. No matter how hard she tried, how many charitable causes she supported, how loyal she remained to Charles, there were those who would never accept her. And Charles? He had never truly let go of Diana. Her photographs adorned his private office. Her memory lingered in interviews. Her name, though rarely spoken aloud in public, still weighed heavily on his heart. Camilla knew this, and in some ways, it was the wound that never healed. Sources close to the palace revealed that In their final weeks together, Camilla had grown increasingly sensitive to Charles's mention of Diana. One incident in particular stood out. During a quiet moment, Charles reportedly referenced a letter Diana had written to William, a note full of motherly hope and royal wisdom. Camilla, usually composed, had said coldly, "You speak of her as if she's still here. Maybe she is, for you." Charles didn't reply, but in that moment, something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, just the realization that the past had never really passed. Camilla was not fighting a ghost. She was living in its shadow. And for a queen who had given everything to be seen, to be recognized, not just as Charles's partner, but as a person, that shadow had become unbearable. Her exit, then, wasn't just a break from the present. It was a surrender to the past, one she could no longer outshine. Buckingham Palace has weathered storms before. Scandals, abdications, divorces, even death. But Camilla's absence brought something different. Not chaos, not confrontation, stillness. And in that stillness, the royal household was forced to confront what it rarely does, its own reflection. There was no official replacement, no sudden reshuffling. The Queen Consort's name was simply gone, quietly withdrawn from press briefings, omitted from ceremonial invitations. Her charities continued without her presence. Her staff, some reassigned, others dismissed, left with sealed lips and uncertain futures. What remained was an eerie gap at the king's side. Charles, once buoyed by Camilla's calming presence, now moved like a man half-formed. At public events, he smiled as protocol required, but his voice was thinner. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of regalia. At a recent reception for Commonwealth leaders, he fumbled his notes twice. "He looked lost," whispered one diplomat, "like a man standing where he no longer wants to be." The public noticed, and though opinions remained divided on Camilla's role, her disappearance stirred a strange sympathy, even from longtime critics. After decades of calling her an intruder, some now questioned if she had simply been a woman cast into a role no one could survive. The tabloids shifted tone. Where once they ran headlines of scandal, now they asked, did we push her out? Was she ever truly accepted? Social media swelled with speculation and sentiment. Camilla's defenders called her the most misunderstood royal in modern history. Detractors, quieter now, wondered if Diana's shadow had finally exacted its cost. Inside the palace, efforts to stabilize continued. William and Kate maintained relentless public schedules. Their children appeared more often in official photos, symbols of continuity. But even they moved with caution, careful not to draw attention to the vacuum Camilla had left behind. Because it wasn't just about her departure, it was about what it exposed. The monarchy, so often presented as infallible, enduring, was now undeniably human, vulnerable to love, loss, pride, and silence. No title could shield it, no crown could fix it. And Charles, once so sure of the path he'd waited a lifetime to walk, now found himself asking the most dangerous royal question of all. Was it worth it? He had chosen duty. He had protected the throne. But in doing so, he had lost the one person who stood beside him when the rest of the world turned away. And the cost of that choice was no longer a secret. It was a crown missing its queen. In the quiet weeks that followed Camilla's departure, nothing inside the palace looked outwardly broken. The chandeliers still gleamed. The guards still changed. The formalities never wavered. But something fundamental had changed. King Charles III, once supported by the woman who stood with him through exile and elevation, now walked alone. His royal diaries, once filled with shared engagements and quiet weekends with Camilla, had gaps, subtle but telling. Behind closed doors, the weight of her absence grew heavier. Charles had stopped speaking her name in meetings, yet staff often caught him staring out windows or lingering near her old reading chair in Clarence House. One evening, after a state dinner, he returned to his study and placed a worn photograph of them, taken on a rare, unguarded afternoon in Scotland, face down. "He still wears his wedding," one aide whispered, "but it looks more like a reminder now than a promise." Camilla, in self-imposed exile at her Gloucestershire estate, remained silent. Friends who visited her described a woman composed but wounded. she had begun writing, whether a memoir, a journal, or a farewell letter, he still wears his wedding ring. "She's not looking for pity," said one confidant. "She just wants her version of the truth to exist before the palace writes its own." Her story, though unspoken, was taking form in the public consciousness, not as a villain nor as a heroine, but as a woman who had given everything to stand beside a king, and in the end had stepped away not because she was defeated, but because she could no longer bear being invisible. Meanwhile, the institution moved on. William and Kate's influence grew. Press releases shifted subtly to spotlight the Prince and Princess of Wales. Camilla's name appeared less and less. Her portrait, once slated for public display, was quietly delayed. No scandal, no statement, just erasure by omission. But history has a memory longer than any reign, and though the crown endures, it remembers every fracture that shaped it, every sacrifice, every silence, every step away from love in the name of duty. Charles made his final choice the moment he let Camilla leave, not with malice, not even with clarity, but with the resignation of a man who realized, too late, that the cost of the throne isn't just public, it's deeply, painfully personal. He remains king, but in the stillness of royal halls and the hush of empty rooms, that title rings more hollow now than ever before, because some losses aren't followed by scandal or ceremony. Some just echo, quietly, endlessly, like a vow broken by silence. They once stood side by side, a king and the woman the world never fully welcomed, but who never once stepped back from the storm. Now, Camilla is gone. Not in scandal, not in disgrace. She left the same way she entered, quietly, with strength mistaken for silence and sacrifice mistaken for ambition. In Buckingham Palace, time moves forward. New schedules, new faces, new heirs stepping into the light. The monarchy continues, as it always does. But within its marble walls and behind its polished glass, the memory of her lingers. Her favorite books still line a forgotten shelf in Clarence House. A scarf she left behind remains folded on a chair no one sits in anymore. And Charles, King of the United Kingdom, still catches himself turning to speak, only to remember she's not there. In the gardens of her Gloucestershire retreat, Camilla walks among the hedges in the early light, far from the flash of cameras and the burden of expectation. She doesn't wear a crown, but perhaps, for the first time in decades, she wears peace. She was never meant to be a fairy tale. She was a woman who loved a man destined for a throne and lost him to it. And though the world may forget the full measure of what she endured, the crown won't, because in every silence that follows her, in every echo down the halls of power, one truth remains unshaken. Not all queens sit beside kings. Some walk away and take the weight of the story with them.